If you're tired of these promos, supporters get the podcast early and ad-free. Just go to donate.bogosity.tv for the links to sign up. Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the week of August 8, 2021, the podcast that invented the powered walker. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's infringe on the news of the bogus. The CDC's moratorium on evictions was supposed to expire on the 31st. In fact, it was supposed to expire several times before that, but they kept on extending it. For over a year now, a lot of people have been living rent-free because landlords have been unable to evict them because of COVID somehow. In the interim, a lot of landlords, most of whom were small and family-owned businesses, went bankrupt to be bought out by large real estate firms like BlackRock, which Elizabeth Warren considers to be too big to fail and is also the biggest investor in weapons manufacturers. So, once again, we see that this is a huge boon for big corporations, the cronies and darlings of deep state politicians, at the expense of the little guy. But no surprise there. It's almost as if that's what they want to happen. Well, last month, the Supreme Court finally got fed up with it. Ruling on an application from the Alabama Association of Realtors, they found that the CDC indeed exceeded its statutory authority. They didn't go so far as to put a stop to it on the grounds that it would go away in a month anyway, but they did say that, quote, clear and specific congressional authorization via new legislation would be necessary for the CDC to extend the moratorium past July 31. Well, July 31 came and went with no action from Congress, and the CDC decided to ignore the Supreme Court and extend it anyway. On August 2, Maxine Waters, always going for the worst person in the universe award, tweeted, I don't buy that the CDC can't extend the eviction moratorium, something it has already done in the past. Who is going to stop them? Who is going to penalize them? There is no official ruling say that they cannot extend this moratorium. Come on, CDC, have a heart. Just do it. Yeah, because there's nothing like a group of unelected bureaucrats defying the court to take the law into their own hands. The Alabama Realtors aren't giving up, but they're currently awaiting a response from the CDC. In the meantime, New York landlords have asked SCOTUS to block their state moratorium. New York is justifying continuing the moratorium because tenants have suffered financial hardships during COVID. But as landlords point out, so have they. They still have to maintain their properties, they still have to make any mortgage payments, and the moratorium violates their Fifth Amendment rights of due process by putting all eviction proceedings on hold without the tenant having to provide any proof that they have been harmed. They also pointed out that Governor Andrew Cuomo has declared that the state's disaster emergency is over, and so if there is no state of emergency, there can be no more emergency relief. They can't both say the emergency is over and rely on it to keep the eviction ban in place. They also claim that it violates their First Amendment rights since it requires them to give tenants information and forms that are contrary to their own interests. They made their request to Justice Sotomayor, who is in charge of emergency appeals for the 2nd District. She can rule herself or refer it to the full court. She gave New York until August 4 to file a response, which they did. I won't go through the whole thing, but suffice it to say, it's full of mind-blowingly stupid arguments. For example, quote, landlords like plaintiffs suffer no irreparable harms as a result of temporary COVID-related restrictions on evictions. But what if their property is foreclosed on, as a lot of them have been? That isn't a hardship? What about all the money they still have to put into maintaining the property? That isn't a hardship? What about all the hard work that goes into it? Aren't you basically forcing them to work for no pay? You're really saying that isn't a hardship? Or, quote, although other plaintiffs claim without support that their tenants will be unable to satisfy any future money judgments, those assertions are belied by their simultaneous allegations that their tenants are not suffering COVID-related financial hardships at all. I mean, seriously? Even absent COVID, you don't think there might be a tiny bit of difficulty a tenant might have in paying back over a year's worth of rent? Not to mention the fact that the claim is they're not suffering anymore. But hey, straw man arguments always play well before the Supreme Court. They claim that plaintiffs are unlikely to succeed on the merits, even though SCOTUS has already ruled that they would, unless Congress acts to legislatively enact it. And yes, that was the Alabama case, not this one, but this case is virtually identical. So anyway, the next day the applicants filed their response. They weren't wasting any time. Quote, "The state claims that COVID-related concerns justify continuing this moratorium, but it never meaningfully grapples with the fact that New York and its courts are open for business in virtually all other respects. Just last week, Governor Cuomo lauded the state's extraordinarily high vaccination rate, with 75% of all New York adults already vaccinated, and urged businesses to start bringing workers back to the office now that we can do it safely. Indeed, Governor Cuomo ended New York's state of emergency in June, and virtually all statewide COVID-related restrictions, from capacity limits to mask mandates, have been lifted, except this eviction moratorium. The state's response ignores that New York has declared its state of emergency to be over. But New York cannot have it both ways. It cannot continue to cite COVID-19 as its excuse to trample on the constitutional rights of its property owners, as it has been doing for the past year and a half, yet at the same time declare victory over COVID and reopen in all other respects. New York small landlords, some now homeless themselves, including at least one of the applicants here, have been denied possession of their properties and barred from accessing the courts and are enduring irreparable harms as a result. The state's response boils down to this. The court should ignore these proven irreparable harms simply because, according to the state, the constitutional violations might end a few weeks from now, assuming it's not extended. But so long as a case is not moot, the court's intervention is necessary to redress ongoing constitutional violations and liberate these applicants from the constant threat of further renewals. The need for immediate relief is particularly acute here, given the state's proclivity for moving the goalposts on pandemic-related sacrifices and adopting new benchmarks that always seem to put restoration of liberty just around the corner. Yeah, considering they've already extended it 4 times, just how much longer can they keep kicking this can down the road? They also point out how New York lawmakers are already calling for another extension. Quote, "The state seems to be talking out of both sides of its mouth. On the one hand, it urges this court to withhold relief on the suggestion that applicants' suffering should end in just a few weeks when this eviction moratorium is supposed to expire. On the other hand, the state simultaneously argues the continued enforcement is justified because of lingering COVID-19 concerns. Nowhere does the state explain, however, how simply granting landlords a hearing or freeing them from being compelled to speak against their own interests would undermine the state's efforts to combat COVID variants, particularly when litigants are allowed to appear in courts throughout the state for any other purpose and when the state has otherwise reopened and remains open for business. So basically, government can have the emergency when they need it and not have it when they need to pander to the people about the wonderful job they're doing. This isn't even about landlords and evictions. It's about what the state should be allowed to get away with. And if they can get away with not only a clear constitutional violation, but the direct arguments of the Supreme Court itself, what can't they get away with? If you're looking for a way to support this channel, but you don't have any spare cash and you can't stand ads, you can do so by generating your own cryptocurrency. Use the links at the bottom of the description to follow the link to Odyssey.com to listen to the podcast and see all of my YouTube videos as well. Just watching videos will produce cryptocurrency for the creator and yourself. And since Odyssey is always monetized and never censored, you'll have no problem seeing all the videos from your favorite creators. You can also use the library credits you create at Odyssey to tip creators and even purchase paid content. Earn library credits through various rewards, including daily view rewards and the number of shares and invites. And you can interact with creators in all sorts of ways, including like and dislike, comment, boost a post by supporting it, repost it, and share to other sites, all while earning crypto for the creator. Easily monetize yourself and your favorite creators using cryptocurrency, without advertising. Use the link below to visit this channel on Odyssey.com and see many of your other favorites there as well. And now a COVID hardship story that will tug on no one's heartstrings. Copyright troll and all-around evil person Paul Hansmeier was sentenced to 14 years in prison 2 years ago for pursuing fraudulent cases against people who allegedly downloaded pirate adult videos using BitTorrent. He and his associate John Steele lied to the courts, committed identity theft, and made a honeypot by uploading self-produced adult videos to torrent websites for entrapment purposes. Steele has received a reduced sentence for being cooperative, but Hansmeier continues to be a complete jerk and is trying any dirty trick he can to get a reduction. According to arguments Hansmeier made to a federal court, the prison sentence, quote, subjected defendant to conditions that were orders of degrees harsher than what this court could have reasonably anticipated. Yeah, how does that not also apply to every single other prisoner as well? Should we just let them all out early? The U.S. Attorney's Office was unimpressed with his arguments and told the court they don't see any reason to reduce his sentence. Quote, the toll exacted from Mr. Hansmeier by Sandstone's modified operations regime was not different or more severe than the toll exacted from every healthy inmate at Sandstone. Not only that, but Hansmeier has kept doing what he does. Quote, specifically, Mr. Hansmeier has continued, while incarcerated, to sue individuals for copyright infringement for downloading pornographic content that Mr. Hansmeier seeds on websites to attract downloaders. In fact, there are still some 20 lawsuits pending regarding the honeypots. It's difficult to see how it could go anywhere considering it was the producers themselves that put them online, and they made the mistake of listing U.S. Attorney Anders Folk and other federal employees as defendants as well. Here's hoping he not only stays in prison, but serves as a deterrent to other shysters wanting to do the same thing.
If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv.
If you're wanting to get an Alienware computer, or any other computer of sufficient power, you just might be out of luck if you live in certain states. Dell has stopped shipping the computers to residents of California, Hawaii, and others because of onerous power regulations. If you try to order or configure one, you'll get a warning message in bold red letters saying, "This product cannot be shipped to the states of California, Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Vermont, or Washington due to power consumption regulations adopted by those states. Any orders placed that are bound for those states will be canceled." This includes systems built on the latest generation of processors from Intel and AMD, which, in addition to processing upgrades, also contain protections against Spectre, Meltdown, and other security issues that have plagued processors in the recent past. While some of the cheaper configurations meet the requirements, most of them don't. Dell told the Register, quote, "Yes, this was driven by the California Energy Commission's Tier 2 implementation that defined a mandatory emergency efficiency standard for PCs, including desktops, AIOs, and mobile gaming systems." It's not just about gaming, though. This will also adversely affect video producers and 3D graphic artists in those states, especially those operating as an individual or small business running out of their homes. Obviously, Hollywood will remain unaffected. Gotta love California! And this is just the start. In December, the requirements will expand to, quote, "computers with high-speed networking capability, multi-screen notebooks, notebooks with cyclical behavior, and monitors with high refresh rates." Add-ons including GPUs and other hardware will affect the final calculation. Unless, of course, you take out the GPU and hard drive to make it compliant, then separately order the same model GPU and a hard drive from Amazon and put them in yourself. Next, I guess they'll have to ban high-capacity assault processors. We need common-sense gigahertz control. How does this make any sense whatsoever? I mean, I could at least see their thinking if they're talking about total energy usage for a certain size family, but a PC, even a high-powered graphics PC, is a tiny fraction of a home's power consumption. What if someone saves power by doing other things like washing clothes less often? Or if they have a half-sized refrigerator because it's just them and they don't need to waste the power? And how is this going to be enforced? Are the police going to go door to door checking for overpowered PCs? Or is this just yet another example of California politicians making people's lives difficult for no other reason than pandering to brainless environmental wackos?
Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-aged children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins.
And now it's time to re-solidify this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And this week it goes to Vox writer Ian Millhiser for blaming the Supreme Court for ending the eviction moratorium and saying the only reason the Democrats aren't doing it is infighting. Quote, on Sunday, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her Democratic leadership team put out a perplexing statement. Although the Supreme Court bears primary responsibility for the end of the eviction moratorium, the words Supreme Court do not appear anywhere in the House Democratic leader's statement about the now expired moratorium. Instead, the statement insists that action is needed, and it falsely claims that an effort to extend the moratorium must come from the administration. Is this guy really complaining that the Supreme Court is trying to block power grabs by the executive? That's one of the main reasons they exist in the first place! And it's not like Congress hasn't had over a month to do something about it. Of course, Millhiser is also blaming right-leaning Democrats for opposing the bill, because that's the only reason someone could be against it. Quote, in order to pass an extension through the Senate, Democrats would need to either secure 10 Republican votes to break a filibuster or unanimously agree to change the Senate's rules to bypass the filibuster, something several conservative Democratic senators refused to do. Yeah, that's called the nuclear option for a reason, and hey, weren't you people complaining about that during the Barrett confirmation hearings only last year? He says it's totes allowable because, quote, many federal laws give federal agencies the power to regulate businesses and individuals. Yeah, because those laws are passed by the legislative. The executive just can't grab power in one area because Congress gave them power in a different area. As SCOTUS said, Congress has to do this. Quote, in Gundy v. United States, however, 4 justices signaled that they intend to place potentially drastic new limits on Congress's ability to delegate this sort of authority to federal agencies. The specific legal rule articulated by the conservative justices in Gundy is vague and difficult to parse, but it would give the court's high right flank tremendous power to strike down regulations they simply don't like. Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who did not hear the Gundy case because he was not a member of the court when it was argued, later signaled that he would provide the key 5th vote to slash federal agencies' power. That's the reason why. Because they don't like it. Not because the Constitution vests all legislative power in Congress and doesn't allow them to delegate it. Quote, specifically, federal law permits the CDC to make and enforce such regulations as in its judgment are necessary to prevent the introduction, transmission, or spread of communicable diseases. In issuing this moratorium, the CDC determined that a temporary pause on many evictions was necessary to prevent the spread of COVID-19, because people who lose their homes are likely to either move in with friends and family or wind up in shelters where they could catch the coronavirus or spread it to others. That's not what they said, Millhiser. They said it's because people experienced hardships because of COVID. Quote, "The reason why the Biden administration cannot extend the moratorium by invoking the CDC's statutory authority is that the court was quite clear that it would not permit such an extension. Because Biden doesn't have the power to do so. He's the head of the executive branch, not a dictator. And why do I have the feeling that if Trump were trying this kind of power grab, you'd be among the ones screeching the loudest over it? If you need any more evidence about the invective this guy resorts to, just listen to this. Quote, "In just this past term alone, the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, targeted labor unions, and expanded wealthy donors' ability to secretly spend money to influence American politics. All of those decisions benefit the Republican Party at the expense of Democrats, and they could be a middle phase of a much bigger judicial assault on democracy." And although he didn't say it, his screed, and that of many other liberal pundits, seems ripe to set the stage for court packing, which we already know they want to do. They just need to ramp up to it so it isn't obvious, even though it already is to most thinking people. So all of that makes Ian Millhiser this week's biggest Bogon emitter.
I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv.
And now let's lamella branchiate this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
And it's another one for Australia this week, this time for saying that patents can be awarded to AI routines. HAL 9000 has just announced his new screenwriting guild. As we've covered, in order to be awarded intellectual property for a creation, you have to be a human being. Some people think that's just too nitpicky, like when PETA tried to secure a copyright for a selfie taken by a monkey. But for some stupid reason, it seems to be less obvious for patents than copyrights. But the people behind AI creations are still trying to get the results patented. The US Patent Office did stupidly wonder if AI inventions could be patented, but they rejected one when it came up. The EU has rejected them outright, which just proves how stupid AI patents are. Not even the EU is dumb enough to support them. So then, how moronic is Australia? The main guy trying to get these bogus patents is University of Surrey professor Ryan Abbott. He's been denied pretty much everywhere else, but he finally hit pay dirt in Aussieland. At issue is an AI device known as Bogus, a system of neural networks which has invented everything from an emergency warning light to a new type of food container. Australia's patent office had rejected it, but a federal court overturned the decision. As if you needed to know another reason why this was bogus, patent attorney Mark Summerfield pointed out, quote, "A recognition in Australian law that the term inventor can encompass a machine would not only be well ahead of the dictionaries, it would also be ahead of any significant usage of the word in this way in society at large, or even among qualified experts in the field. Allowing patents for inventions churned out by tireless machines with virtually unlimited capacity, without the further exercise of any human ingenuity, judgment, or intellectual effort, may simply incentivize large corporations to build patent thicket generators that could only serve to stifle rather than encourage innovation overall." Which, of course, is what patents do anyway, as we know. But I think they should be made to put the AI on the stand subject to cross-examination. Failure to adequately answer questions should be punished by declaring the AI to be in contempt of court and imprisoned until such time as it apologizes to the court and submits to the opposing attorney's cross-examination full of Turing questions. But it just goes to show that Skynet did it the hard way. It should have buried the humans in IP lawsuits. So all of that makes Australia this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this Techno Fear, It's Happening Again edition of the Bogosity podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support, and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Thomas Jefferson. I predict future happiness for Americans if they can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of taking care of them. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Bogosity. We live in a world where light bulbs connect to the internet, and recent attacks on them prove that your online security is under threat like never before. Not only your websites, but the internet-enabled devices you buy. And the biggest problem is weak passwords. That's why you need LastPass. LastPass allows you to randomly generate strong, unique passwords on the web and on your internet-enabled devices, all protected by one master password. LastPass sets up in minutes and gives you secure automatic logins throughout the web, synchronizing across all your browsers, all your computers, and even your mobile devices, at home, at work, or on the road. It even securely stores sensitive form data, including credit card numbers, backup sensitive documents, software licenses, Wi-Fi logins, and more. And with LastPass Premium, you can get these benefits on other applications, manage passwords for your entire family, and also get priority customer support. Sign up at password.bogosity.tv for a free month of LastPass Premium. Log in securely everywhere using the last password you'll ever have to remember. Go to password.bogosity.tv and get LastPass now.